For most of human history, every generation inherited the same beginning. They were born into bodies shaped by biology, into minds shaped by evolution, and into a world where memory, identity, and limitation were fixed starting points. Change happened slowly, across lifetimes, carried forward through experience. But this generation begins differently. They are not born into the same constraints. Their cognitive environments are structured before awareness. Their emotional ranges are guided early. Their memories are not only formed, they are curated from the beginning. Nothing about their starting point is accidental. The randomness that once defined human development has been reduced. The instability that once shaped identity has been smoothed. The conditions of becoming are no longer left to chance. To them, this feels normal. They do not experience the difference because they never knew what came before. For most of human history, development was shaped by resistance. Learning required effort. Growth required failure. Understanding emerged through friction, through moments where the world did not immediately respond, where outcomes were uncertain, and where progress had to be earned over time. But this generation does not encounter those conditions. Their environments adjust instantly. Challenges are calibrated to avoid overwhelming them. Mistakes are softened before they become disruptive. Systems intervene early, ensuring that difficulty never escalates into instability. From the outside, this appears ideal. Stress is reduced, anxiety is minimized, development becomes efficient, guided, and optimized toward stability. The unpredictability that once defined growth is replaced with controlled progression. But something fundamental is missing. Struggle was never just an obstacle. It was a signal. It marked the boundaries of understanding. It defined the edge between what was known and what was not. And without it, that boundary becomes harder to feel. For generations before them, failure was unavoidable. It was built into the process of becoming. Mistakes carried consequence. Effort did not always lead to success. And through that uncertainty, people learned not just how to improve, but how to persist. Failure was not only an outcome, it was a teacher. But for this generation, failure rarely arrives in the same way. Systems anticipate errors before they occur. Outcomes are guided toward success. Paths are adjusted in real time, ensuring that mistakes never fully develop into setbacks. The experience of failure becomes partial, softened, often invisible. From the outside, this appears efficient. Progress is faster. Confidence remains stable. Development moves forward without interruption or collapse. But something begins to change. Without failure, there is no resistance to overcome. Without resistance, persistence has no function. And without persistence, growth begins to follow a different pattern, one that no longer depends on recovery, only on continuation. Without failure, confidence begins to change. For most of human history, confidence was earned. It developed through resistance, through uncertainty, mistakes, and the gradual realization that difficulty could be faced and overcome. It was not constant. It fluctuated, shaped by experience. But for this generation, confidence forms differently. It is not built through recovery. It is maintained through continuity. Because systems prevent disruption, confidence is never significantly challenged. Progress remains stable. Outcomes remain predictable. The internal sense of capability does not need to adapt to setbacks because setbacks rarely occur. From the outside, this appears ideal. Children grow without self-doubt. They move forward without hesitation. Their sense of ability remains intact across changing situations. But something subtle is missing. Confidence was never only about feeling capable. It was about knowing what happens when you are not. And without that contrast, confidence becomes something smoother. but also something less tested. As development stabilizes, emotion begins to follow. For most of human history, emotional life was defined by variation. Intensity rose and fell. Moments of joy were shaped by contrast with sadness. Excitement was amplified by uncertainty. Emotional extremes gave depth to experience. But this generation develops differently. Their environments regulate emotional input. Their memories are curated. Their experiences are smoothed before they can become overwhelming. As a result, emotional range narrows not through suppression, but through design. At first, this feels like balance. Children remain calm. Reactions stay controlled. Emotional states transition smoothly without sharp disruption. The unpredictability that once defined feeling is replaced with stability. But something begins to fade. Emotion was never only about control. It was about intensity. And without intensity, experience changes. Moments still occur. Feelings still exist. But the distance between them shrinks until everything begins to feel consistent. As emotional intensity stabilizes, relationships begin to change. For most of human history, connection was shaped by friction, misunderstanding, disagreement, vulnerability. These were not interruptions to relationships, but the forces that gave them depth. People learned each other through difference, through tension, through the effort required to truly understand another person. But this generation connects differently. Their emotional responses are regulated. Their reactions are predictable. Systems assist communication, smoothing misunderstandings before they escalate. Conflict becomes rare, not because people fully agree, but because disagreement rarely reaches intensity. At first, this feels like progress. Relationships are easier. Interactions are more stable. Emotional disruption no longer threatens connection. Everything flows more smoothly, more consistently. But something begins to shift. Without friction, relationships lose resistance. Without resistance, depth becomes harder to form. People connect more easily, but also more lightly. And over time, connection begins to feel less like something built and more like something maintained. At first, the differences are difficult to notice. This generation looks human. They move through the world with the same physical presence, the same language, the same external behaviors. On the surface, nothing appears fundamentally changed. But over time, the differences begin to emerge. Not in what they do, but in how they experience. Their reactions remain stable where others would fluctuate. Their decisions feel consistent where others might hesitate. Emotional responses resolve quickly without lingering tension. Situations that once created internal conflict pass without disruption. To them, this feels normal. To those who came before, it feels unfamiliar. The gap is not dramatic. It is subtle, but it is persistent. And as interactions continue, it becomes clear that this is not a variation of the same human experience. It is a different baseline entirely. As the new generation stabilizes, the difference becomes more visible through contrast. Not everyone has changed. Those who developed before these systems remain. And compared to the new baseline, they begin to feel extreme. Their emotions rise and fall unpredictably. Their reactions linger. Their decisions carry hesitation, doubt, and internal conflict. What once felt normal now appears unstable not because it has changed, but because the reference point has. To the new generation, this intensity feels unnecessary, even inefficient. But to those who still experience it, that intensity is not a flaw. It is depth. It is the weight of memory, the persistence of feeling, the unresolved nature of being human without intervention. Their experiences are less controlled, but also less filtered. And as the gap widens, a quiet inversion begins to take place. What was once considered normal starts to look like too much. As the gap between generations widens, something deeper begins to change. The definition of what it means to be human. For most of history, humanity was understood through shared limitations. Emotional variability, cognitive boundaries, vulnerability to experience these were not exceptions, but the foundation of the human condition. But this generation does not share those constraints in the same way. Their emotional range is stabilized. Their development is guided. Their experiences are structured to avoid disruption. What was once considered essential to being human begins to fade from their baseline entirely. At first, this is described as evolution, an improvement, a refinement, a step forward in human development. But over time, the language begins to shift. The differences are no longer framed as variation. They are framed as distinction. And gradually, without a clear boundary or moment of separation, the question begins to change. Not how humanity has evolved, but whether this is still the same humanity at all. As the distinction becomes clear, a new possibility emerges. Transition. Not everyone is born into this new baseline, but increasingly, people are given the option to move toward it. Systems exist to stabilize emotion, refine cognition, and reshape the patterns that once defined human experience. At first, the decision feels practical. Reduced anxiety, increased clarity, more stable relationships. The advantages are visible, measurable, and immediate. For many, the choice is not philosophical, it is functional. And so, some begin to change. Gradually, intentionally, they adjust their internal systems to align with the new generation. Emotional range narrows, reactions stabilize, unpredictability fades. The shift is not instant, but it is steady. From the outside, it looks like improvement, but from the inside, something more complex unfolds. Because this is not just adaptation, it is transformation. And with each step forward, the question becomes harder to ignore. Not what is gained, but what is left behind. At first, the transition feels adjustable. Early changes can be paused. Settings can be modified. The process appears flexible, a gradual alignment rather than a permanent departure. People move forward with the assumption that they can return if needed. But over time, something changes. The systems deepen their integration. Emotional regulation becomes structural. Cognitive patterns reorganize at a level that is no longer surface level or temporary. The baseline itself begins to shift. And at a certain point, reversal stops being possible. Not because it is restricted, but because there is nothing left to return to. The previous patterns, the instability, the intensity, the unpredictability have not been suppressed. They have been replaced. From the outside, the individual appears stable, improved, aligned with the new generation. But internally, the reference point has changed permanently. And once that reference is gone, the decision is no longer a transition. It is a transformation that cannot be undone. In the end, this generation does not see itself as different. To them, this is simply what it means to exist. They do not feel the absence of what came before because they never experienced it. Instability, emotional extremes, uncertainty, these are not missing elements, they are unknown ones. Their world is consistent, predictable, and internally aligned in ways that previous generations never were. And within that alignment, something new emerges. A form of human experience that is less reactive, less volatile, less defined by friction. Decision-making becomes clearer. Emotional states remain stable. Relationships operate without disruption. Life moves forward without the weight of unpredictability. From the outside, this can look like improvement. From the inside, it simply feels normal. And over time, the distinction that once seemed significant begins to fade. The old definition of human does not disappear through conflict. It is replaced through continuity. Because this generation does not become something else. It becomes what comes next.